An officer in the U.S. Navy could face court-martial for allegedly killing his wife at a hotel in Japan and then leaving her body behind in the hotel room and heading back to base. We are learning new details about what officials believe happened to her and what could happen next in this case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law&Crime legal alert. Lawsuits allege that antacid use has been linked to increases in stomach cancer and gastric cancer. If you or a loved one were diagnosed with stomach cancer or gastric cancer after using an antacid, you may qualify for compensation. And one of our legal sponsors is partnering with the Driscoll firm. This is a national firm helping those injured to ensure their claims are thoroughly presented. Visit antacidclaims.com/sidebar, scan the QR code on screen to answer less than 10 questions and check your eligibility to file a claim. So back in October, police in Fukuoka, Japan responded to a horrifying report. There was a woman that was dead in a hotel room. The U.S. outlet Stars and Stripes reports that the address matched Hotel Seoul. Few details were released at first, but the victim would later be identified as Jessica Arguinzoni Olsen, who went by Jessie. Now, after NCIS launched an investigation, they identified their main suspect, Jessie's husband, Lieutenant Commander Christopher Olsen. Now, the hotel is about 80 miles away from a naval base where Lieutenant Commander Christopher Olsen had previously been stationed, and this is in Sasebo, Japan. Now, I want to put this out there as we get into this. Some of the information we're getting is a little disjointed. You have American news sites, they're reporting on what some Japanese media outlets state. We can't really locate the source material from last fall. So I say that, take everything with a grain of salt. Some of these details could change, but here's what we know so far. So Stars and Stripes indicates that Kyoto News reported Jessie was found on the ground, bleeding. That police indicated at the time that she may have been involved in a crime. Now, Jessie's sister, Dominique, told Stars and Stripes that her family was informed of their loved one's death over the phone, but that getting information after that wasn't very easy. They were reportedly only told that Jessie's husband was, quote, a person of interest. Dominique told the outlet that the family was told Jessie had injuries to her head, including her face, and that her jaw was broken, along with a hyoid bone. This is a bone in the neck, suggesting that she was strangled. Stars and Stripes provided details about what Japanese media outlets were reporting at the time, including that U.S. forces detained Olsen for questioning and that Japanese police were cooperating with the American investigators. Kyoto News reported that security cameras at the hotel showed someone connected to the U.S. as visiting the hotel with Jessie at around 7 p.m. on Friday, October 25th, 2024, and then leaving Sunday morning alone. The call to police came in just after 9 a.m. when hotel staff had found Jessie. Her body was returned to her family in the United States more than 2 weeks after her death on November 16th. A funeral was held in Monroe, New York later that month. And for reasons that are still unclear, Olsen was just charged for murder and obstruction of justice earlier in May, months after Jessie's body was found. So to help dig into this a little bit, I know it's a bit complicated, I'm joined right now by attorney and military veteran Andrew Cherkasky. My good friend Andrew, good to see you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
I just mentioned you last week. If anybody wants to know, check out that episode. You'll see why I mentioned Andrew last week. It's really good to see you. This is an odd case. What are your first thoughts about it?
Well, I don't know that it is that odd.
Okay.
The United States military has jurisdiction to prosecute its military members really across the world. Now, oftentimes the local police, so in this case the Japanese, they have primary jurisdiction, and so they generally run an investigation while military investigators run an investigation. Obviously, there's language barriers and diplomatic barriers in how they coordinate, and I've done cases in Japan with the U.S. Navy many times before. Sometimes there's issues there, and sometimes that coordination is not perfect, but ultimately the United States will ask Japan to release people they're prosecuting from the military so that the U.S. can prosecute them. It takes months to do that, and it's a whole diplomatic process.
When you say issues, do you mean a language barrier or the difference in the way they conduct an investigation?
All of it, anything you can think of. So you've got the language barrier. You also have the red tape, just the administrators who are moving papers around. There's I keep saying diplomatic. It really truly is a Department of State and the Japanese equivalent who are communicating on how this information is shared and whether people are playing nice with each other, the investigators from one side to the other side. And so it's a tremendous effort to get all of the right players together, to get everybody agreeing on how they're going about the investigation. And there's very different techniques because it's a very different legal system.
Can I ask you an amateurish question,
Sure.
but I feel I have to ask it? I always wonder when you have multiple jurisdictions and multiple organizations cooperating in some fashion on investigation, is that a good thing, right? More eyeballs, more people looking at it, or are you concerned something could be missed? And particularly when you're dealing with a foreign nation.
Yeah, I think the latter is true the majority of the time. And it's not even just because of the language barriers again, but the difference in the systems is so dramatic. The way they prosecute, the way they address criminal law, it's not even like the European system. It's got its own system of justice that's built into it in the way that they approach potential defendants and those suspected, the way that they secure crime scenes. Everything is different in fundamental ways, and so that does create some real issues. They do the best to coordinate, but it is a barrier to effective prosecution, I think.
What do you make of the delay in charging?
I think that the delay in charging, a murder case is not always charged right away, especially when it wasn't right there, right then. And so I think they likely had to do quite a bit of investigation on the crime itself. I also see that handover of jurisdiction from Japan to the United States usually taking many months. Sometimes it goes a little bit quicker, especially if somebody's in pretrial confinement in the meantime. And it's a little unclear whether he's in a pretrial confinement status or not, Lieutenant Commander Olsen. But that's the process, and it does take many months to do that.
Again, the lack of information, it's a problem, or the miscommunication. We're trying to piece together the pieces of this puzzle. But from what we could ascertain about what happened to her, what do you take away from that crime scene?
Well, it certainly seems like there was somebody else involved. All those external injuries around the neck and the head, that indicates something happened. We've got to go back and wonder if there's perhaps witnesses who heard something, maybe yelling or screaming. That would tend to substantiate some sort of argument or fight. You have to wonder, is this something that's sexually based in a bedroom? Again, hands around neck, that can be the case. So we don't have that motive. We don't have the thing that ties together what he did or why he did it, other than those injuries. But that's, I think we are going to start to hear more about that, because what it sounds like happened just recently was what's called an Article 32 preliminary hearing, kind of like a preliminary hearing in civilian courts. They heard some evidence to make that probable cause determination.
And I think you and I have covered a number of cases where we can say, not all the time, but maybe a common characteristic is if you are dealing with a close, upfront attack like that, let's say strangulation, sometimes that would suggest that the perpetrator has a relationship with the victim, that there is some sort of connection there, that they know the person. Mm-hmm. Now, we've seen attacks before where it's complete strangers, but that level, I don't know what the right word is, I don't want to say intimacy, but that level of attack would suggest a familiarity with the victim. Am I totally off base by saying that?
Oh, of course not. I think that you have to have had that proximity, and it's in a hotel room,
right.
Presumably their hotel room that they had rented for the weekend. So unless there's some sort of outlying circumstance, he clearly seems to be the one who would have been in the room and the one who would have had that intimate relationship, such that putting his hands around her neck would be the most likely person. But I'm sure he'll, if there's somebody else who's potentially in that room or potentially connected to her, at some point he'll have to point the finger.
What do you think the obstruction of justice charge is about?
Well, what it sounds like is that she was in that room injured or deceased for some period of time, maybe even a couple of days. The report suggests that they went in and it wasn't until 2 days later that he came out. And so something happened perhaps in that room after she had died, and whether he was moving her body or trying to cover something up, whether he had tried to create a false alibi, that's obstruction of justice, something that interferes with or is intended to interfere with either an investigation or an investigation that's likely to happen. So some sort of cover-up.
Let me lay a little bit more of the background here, because I think it's important for people to have some context here, especially when we have this kind of limited information, cross information, whatever you want to call it. So according to family members, Jesse and Christopher, they met at SUNY Oswego more than a decade ago, got married in 2009. Olsen's LinkedIn page shows he enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 2014, served aboard the USS Chief and USS New Orleans before his current posting in San Diego as a, quote, surface warfare officer. Real quick, anything about that?
Those are the people, the officers who drive the boats, the ships.
Oh, interesting. So he had a big title, right? He was a very big position.
I think of it like pilots for airplanes. These are the boat captains, essentially.
Is it tough to become a commander?
A lieutenant commander is a relatively mid-level white collar, the officer side of things. It's a very respected position. The vast majority of the Navy and the military will be saluting you. But it's still quite a ways away from being a particularly impactful command position.
Can I ask you another amateurish question? Sure. But I don't mind admitting it because the first step is always admitting it. If you are reaching that position, or whether you enter the military in any fashion, do you learn hand-to-hand combat? I mean, if we're talking about a potential strangulation here and a physical attack, do you learn anything like that?
In the Navy, not as much. You have to think of what their jobs are. And then you have to really understand kind of the structure of the military. You've got the enlisted side. Those are the folks that we think of often as kind of more of the blue-collar folks, the doers, the folks who are laboring, the folks who are kind of doing more administrative tasks. And then you've got the officer branch, who are senior to all enlisted folks. Those are more of management-oriented people or people in operation positions like pilots, doctors, lawyers, and that sort of person. And when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, you have to really look. I mean, they're really putting the folks in those training sessions who are more likely to get involved in those. MPs,
sure.
Military police, for example. Those are the folks, or infantry fighters in the Army or the Marine Corps. Navy guys, not as much hand-to-hand.
I was curious, just something I thought about as we were listening to this. So let me talk a little bit more about Jesse. Sometimes in these cases we focus so much on the suspect, the defendant, that we forget about the victim. Let's talk about Jesse. So Jesse's obituary indicates that she studied meteorology at SUNY Oswego, became an aviation meteorologist, an aerospace scientist. Her family says that she was passionate about her love of flying. The Daily Mail reports that Jesse was working as a substitute teacher at a combined middle and high school on base in Japan, where Olsen was stationed from November 2022 to December 2023. So what happens now that Olsen has been arrested and charged is going to be a very interesting question. A court-martial could be on the table, but we're a couple steps away from that, because last week Olsen appeared at Naval Base San Diego for what's called, as we talked about it before, an Article 32 hearing, which is very similar to a preliminary hearing in the civilian court system. An officer is chosen to serve as the PHO, or preliminary hearing officer. According to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, that officer hears testimony, reviews investigative reports, determines whether there's probable cause to go to court-martial. Is it a different kind of standard? How is it different from what we know as our standard preliminary hearing?
Yeah, a lot of the military justice system is made to look and to feel a lot like the civilian justice system in America, but there are a lot of differences. The Article 32 process is not run by an actual judge. It is typically a judge advocate, so somebody who's a lawyer within the military and generally with some degree of rank. They often only look at paper documents. This isn't a discovery opportunity. It's not an opportunity for the defense to really dig in or attack much by way of credibility, because the probable cause standard is so low. So prosecutors generally just hand over a bunch of reports and statements, and that is enough to get them through that initial stage. And then the prosecutors, or the admirals in this case involved, will decide if there's enough evidence to actually go forward to a court-martial.
They make a recommendation to the Navy Office of Special Trial Counsel, right? And then what do they do to determine whether or not to move forward with a general court-martial?
Not to get too far in the weeds, but that's
what our audience likes.
Great. Well, the Office of Special Trial Counsel is actually a very new position. If you kind of have followed any military law over the last decade or two, there's been a lot of outcry about how commanders perhaps make decisions that the public isn't very happy with, where either they don't prosecute, or they prosecute too much, or there's some sort of crime issue. Obviously, sexual assault has been a hot topic in the military military. And so they created in the 2017 Military Justice Act this new Office of Special Trial Counsel, where for the first time really, actual attorneys, actual prosecutors are making prosecutorial decisions affirmatively. Before that, it was always admirals or generals who were in the command of the individual being charged who would order it to a court-martial. They were like a county prosecutor in a sense. And so now certain types of crimes, apparently to include this one, is going to the Office of Special Trial Counsel. So it's lawyers, it's prosecutors who are making these prosecutorial decisions outside of the chain of command, which has both benefits and downsides.
But to be clear, Olsen wouldn't be charged in a military justice system and a civilian criminal court, right?
Well, theoretically, you can be charged both in a foreign court, like in Japan and the United States. Typically, that doesn't happen. Even within the United States, just like a federal prosecution can happen simultaneous with a state prosecution. See Luigi Mangione, who's being prosecuted. Who's being prosecuted by both. Somebody in the military, that's the federal government prosecuting you. Theoretically, state government. But here, I don't see a state directly involved.
Yeah. Now, according to 12 News in New York, Olsen was placed on restriction at Naval Base San Diego. Reported that he somehow violated that, so he was put in the brig until his hearing last week. Again, more details on that weren't available. What does restriction look like?
Yeah, so when you have in the civilian system people being locked up prior to trial, pre-trial detention of some sort, military is a little bit different because you're in the military, and so they have perpetual control over you. So they say that the least amount of restraint necessary to get you to trial is essentially what they want you to do, or to not commit further serious misconduct. And so there's a series of things they can do. They can order you restricted to the base. They could order you restricted to some sort of limits within the base. Don't leave the barracks. Don't leave this part of the campus within the base. And so if somebody then is ordered to that status and then they violate that, even by walking across base to an area they weren't authorized or being out a little bit later than they were supposed to, now they're going to escalate the form of pretrial restraint.
But if you violate it and you're thrown in the brig, that means you did it intentionally, right? It's not like I made a mistake.
I don't know. I mean, there's all sorts of excuses that my guys have come up with over the years. Some of them legit, some of them not so legit. But getting them into the brig obviously triggers certain speedy trial rights and certain advancements of the case. So probably a very negative thing for Lieutenant Commander Olsen, who's now found himself apparently in the brig. But that also creates much heavier deadlines for the prosecutors to move things along.
And when asked for a statement of Jesse's murder, Olsen's eventual arrest, Commander Paul Macapagal, a spokesman for Naval Forces Japan, wrote to Stars and Stripes, "We are unable to comment further at this time due to the ongoing litigation. The Navy is committed to ensuring the military justice system is fair and impartial, and the accused is presumed innocent until proven guilty." What did you make of that statement, and do they do any kind of internal investigation?
Well, we have to recognize NCIS, the crime investigators dedicated to the Navy. If we've watched the TV show, you know nothing about the actual NCIS. They are there to do complex felony level investigations. And for the most part, they're relatively kind of middle of the road investigators. They're not the type of quality that you see at the top of the level in the FBI. And they're not just like regular beat cops. They're doing their thing. There's not a lot of crime in the military. And so it's...
Well, NCIS would say differently.
Well, not compared to the real world. Not compared to the civilian world. And so they do have major crime. They have crime that happens.
Right.
It's not with the same frequency. They don't have as many reps. I'm not trying to diminish the quality of the agency because they think of themselves quite well. But when you compare it to detectives who have done tens of thousands of investigations, it's a little bit different.
And here's the thing, when you think about if these allegations are true. So according to Jesse's sister and loved ones, they didn't realize there might have been problems between Jesse and Olsen. Dominique told Stars and Stripes, "We had no idea they ever had issues. None of her friends, even best friend, had an inkling. However, thinking back, my parents and I realized that she pulled away from us by reducing communications from every week to every month or so." Jesse's family members have spoken out about their experience with both Japanese and U.S. officials following her death. According to Jesse's mother, Dee, in an interview with 12 News, it took almost a month to get Jesse's body back to the States, 3 months to get her beloved dog, and even longer to get her belongings. Dominique told Stars and Stripes for our May 9th article, "We want to grieve. We can't even wrap up her stuff, and it's been very frustrating because the little bit of information we get, it throws us back into when they first called us and told us she was gone." You can see how frustrating that is for the family, but is this standard?
You can't help but feel terrible for the family. What you have to understand when you look at American service members who are stationed overseas, they generally are there for 2 or 3 year assignments. If you bring your spouse with you, called kind of with your spouse, with a dependent is how they refer to it, it's generally 3 years. Over in Japan, it's about a 12-hour time difference from the United States. It's very difficult to keep in contact and stay in communication with people. Some people do it, but the longer you're over there, the more you're living in a different world, and so there is some of that distance. On base, there are some really great organizations for spouses. A lot of spouses, though, end up kind of being very secluded, very to themselves. A lot of people live in the community, not on base, but in the actual Japanese community. And so it can be very isolating, and people can, especially dependents and spouses who are over there, who don't have an American job to go to every day, that can create some issues. I was stationed overseas for 3 years, and it's an interesting process. Different people react differently to it. And so I think that it's fair to attribute some of those changes to potentially the crime here. It might not be.
Right. And I'm glad you made a difference there, because it could be just the situation she was in. But in terms of getting the body back, getting the belongings back, is that typical? It takes some time?
With overseas cases, again, yes.
Yeah.
The Japanese first involved in it. They're going to do their autopsies and be involved to whatever degree they want. Whatever their release process looks like is very different than over here. How they collect evidence and property, and how they store that and house that, and then how they release that. There are certain Navy officers who are supposed to be in charge of how to handle those who die while in service, but when it's spouses who are involved, it's less carefully handled, and so it's not a particularly artful event, and I think that the family is feeling the pain from that.
Yeah, it's a really distressing situation, and our hearts and prayers and our thoughts are with Jesse's family at this time. Really, really difficult. But Andrew Cherkasky, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, what better guest than you to talk about a situation like this? Thanks so much for coming here on set.
Jesse. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.